Hello, and welcome to the latest presentation of the Rift Valley webinar series. My name is Martha Booker Johnson, and I am the host for today's talk. If you are participating in the live webinar, you can submit questions or comments in the chat module of the Zoom application at any time during the presentation, or ask a voice question by raising your hand once the presentation is complete. Today's speakers are Amazigh Bedar and Michael Karani. Amazigh is a teaching researcher assistant at Aix-Marseille University in the Laboratoire Parole et Langage. His research interests include phonology and syntax and their interface. He has conducted research on a range of languages, including Berber and Nilotic languages. Michael is a lecturer and director in the Center for Communication Studies in the College of Humanities, University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. He conducted research on morphology and syntax on the two dialects of Maasai spoken in Tanzania, namely Arusa and Parakuyo, during his MA and PhD, respectively. He is interested in documentation of African languages and morphology and syntax in particular. Please join me in welcoming Amazigh and Michael as they give their talk on the semantics of numeral reduplication in Maasai.
Thank you very much, Martha. Just to mention one thing, I'm no longer the director of the center. So, yeah, just to put record straight. Okay, thank you. This paper we co-authored, I co-authored with Amazigh Bedar, as you introduced him. We are looking at the semantics of numeral reduplication in Maasai. So Maasai, for those who don't know what Maasai or where they can find Maasai language, it's a language spoken in Kenya and Tanzania, in East Africa. Currently, the approximation is 1.5 million speakers. And the data that we'll be talking about so validated. You can have different readings when you have a numeral duplication in a sentence, and you will see that numerals can be replicated, giving rise to three distributive readings to start with. So in these sentences here, sentence one, Atama ilayuk imachungare. This means the boys ate 2 oranges. Number two, Atama ilayuk imachunga are. So the numeral 2 are is reduplicated, and number 2 actually gives interpretation, 3 different interpretations. As you can see, the English translation is the boys ate 2 oranges. And the first interpretation is a participant distributive interpretation. In Roman 1, the boys each ate 2 oranges. And the second, the boys ate 2 oranges in each time interval. And the third, the boys ate 2 oranges in each location. So you can see different types of distributive reading where we have participant, temporal, and spatial. That means in different location. Okay, so we thought this phenomena is really productive in Maasai, and we shall see later in the conclusion that it is more of a productional element than a distributive element. So at first glance, reduplication of numerals gives an equivalent to distributivity. In the same way you would understand elements of quantifiers like each or every in English. So our goal was to provide a description of this phenomenon in Maasai, and of course use a semantic analysis to try to run some diagnostics to assess numeral duplication in Maasai. And this is the outline. We shall see the literature about distributivity, pluractionality, and also the analysis using the diagnostics, and of course the conclusion. Okay, so looking at the syntactic distribution of numerals in Maasai, we find that the duplication of numerals qualify objects and subjects. And here we have a duplicated numeral modifying the object in example number 3. Atama ilayok imachunga are, and this is the boys ate 2 oranges. So the numeral actually modifies the object, as you can see. And in number 4, we reduplicate the numeral Atama ilayok imachunga are to mean the boys ate 2 oranges. Okay, so this is the case for an object. And the following examples show examples demonstrate or illustrating a reduplicated numeral modifying the subject. So you have number 5, Atama ilayok okuni imachunga. So this means 3 boys ate oranges. And number 6, Atama ilayok okuni imachungwa. So the numeral 3 modifies the subject to mean 3 boys ate oranges. So it could be a group of 3 boys, 8 maybe 1 orange or 2 oranges or a number of oranges, but the interpretation here is that a group of 3. So that is the numeral modifying the subject in Maasai. But you can also find the numeral reduplication modifying both the subject and the object. In 7 and 8, as we see in 7, Atama ilayok okunil machunga are, and in 8, Atama ilayok okuni machunga are. So in the interpretation in 7 is that 3 boys ate 2 oranges. So there is a number for each modifying subject and object. And then in 8, the number is duplicated to mean 3 boys, group of 3 boys, different groups of 3 boys, ate 2 oranges. And then so we see that numeral duplication seems to be productive. And of course, we acknowledge that duplication can also occur with other syntactic categories. Yeah, so I was just emphasizing that we find that the phenomenon of numeral reduplication in Maasai seems to be productive in the sense that it can modify, a reduplicated numeral can modify both object and subject as we have seen in previous examples in 7 and 8. So looking at the literature on numeral reduplication in different languages, it is evident that different interpretations are obtained, distributive interpretation to mean focus on elements, participants, or individuals participating in an event. And the second one, we have pluractional interpretations signaling plurality of events taking place in that particular situation or event or utterance. So different studies have been undertaken showing evidence of these aspects here in different languages. So distributivity as a notion borrowed from mathematics, as you can look at the mathematical expression here, which means you have the operation, you have the number, for example, and if you have to multiply the number by individual items of the sum, so A multiplied by a sum of B, C equals to saying A, B, so you multiply a number by one item of the sum, and then of course the other item of the sum, and then you get the result, you add the result. This is the concept of distributivity, as you can see. So the numbers also explain the same, that you have different interpretations or different ways of doing it. You either multiply 2 by the total, or you multiply 2 by each of the number, and then you plus, and then you get the result. So linguistically, the simplest example people can understand is thinking of a distributive quantifier like every and each in English, for example. So each student or each each man did something. That means that is individual distribution. And in other languages, we realized maybe some languages might use adverbs to express distributivity. Let's say individually, using adverbs like separately, but other languages may use morphemes to express the same phenomena. So distributivity, it describes how a property or operation is distributed over the element of a group. And studies have shown that. And you have a picture here to describe each or every boy carries a box. And you can see that each individual carries a box, as the interpretation says. But when it comes to pluractionality, the plurality, this means the plurality of events or action, as introduced by Newman. This refers to the existence of more than one event expressed within the verbal domain. So this is similar to how the plural form of a nominal phrase denotes multiple subjects or objects. And we have an example of a plural morpheme, as I said earlier, in Kokchikel, Mayan language, showing a pluractionality marked by a morpheme to mean I looked for a book. So this morpheme says various times or multiple times. So I would like to invite Amazigh to continue with the following section. Amazigh, please.
Thank you, Mike. Before starting, I would like to thank Andrew for organizing this seminar series, and I thank the participant for being here. Thank you also to Michael for presenting the first part of our presentation. Now I will move onto the analysis, where we use some functional diagnostic to explain the function of numeral reduplication in Maasai. On this slide, we outline the key aspect of our semantic analysis of numeral reduplication in Maasai. To determine its function, we compare it to the universal quantifier kila, which means every or each. This by using 5 semantic diagnostics. Our analysis leads us to argue that numeral reduplication in Maasai is not a marker of distributivity, but rather a marker of event plurality or pluractionality. The 5 diagnostics we apply are as follows. The first one is exhaustivity, which checks whether the reduplicated numeral enforces exhaustive distribution over individuals or not. The second one is atomicity, which tests whether the distribution applies in an atomic way. The third one is the temporal distributivity, which examines whether an event is distributed over times within a singular argument. The fourth one is plurality requirement, which ensures that numeral reduplication applies only in plural context. And the last one is antidurative events, which test whether reduplicated numerals are compatible with some verbs denoting punctual or antidurative events. With these diagnostics, we aim to show that numeral reduplication in Maasai aligns more closely with pluractional markers rather than with distributive markers. Let's start with the first diagnostic, which is exhaustivity or exhaustive distribution. Exhaustivity implies distribution over all individuals. If we take, for example, the English sentence, each boy carries a box, with the quantifier each or every, the sentence is accepted in the context for the picture on the left. In other words, it is accepted in a scenario where each boy carries one box. In this case, we have a scenario of exhaustive distribution. However, for the same sentence, each boy carries a box, the scenario on the right is not accepted because the distribution is not exhaustive. In other words, the object box is not distributed across all subjects who are the boys. This is what we call a non-exhaustive scenario. So this exhaustivity diagnostic will be applied to two different sentences, one with a reduplicated numeral and the other with the quantifier kila, which mean each or every, to see if their interpretations are similar or different. To conduct our analysis, we carried out an experimental study with 6 native speakers. We primarily use judgment tasks based on scenarios illustrated with pictures. The goal of these scenarios is to compare the semantic of sentences involving the quantifier kila, which means each or every, like the sentence 11, with a sentence involving a numeral reduplication as in the sentence 12. So we compare the semantics of the sentence 11, each man has hunted 2 rabbits, with the sentence in 12, the man hunted two rabbits. For each sentence, 11 and 12, we presented 2 scenarios. The first scenario is the one where the distribution is exhaustive, meaning that each of the men hunted 2 rabbits as illustrated in this scenario in the slide. The second scenario is the one where the distribution is non-exhaustive. That is, in 3 cases, each man holds 2 rabbits, but in the last picture, at the bottom right, the man has hunted nothing. There is one man has hunted nothing. This scenario illustrates a non-exhaustive distribution of the rabbits over man. So the result of this diagnostic are presented in this slide. For the sentence involving a reduplicated numeral included in 13, the non-exhaustive distribution scenario is accepted. However, for the sentence with a distributive quantifier kila repeated here in 14, the non-exhaustive distribution scenario is rejected or is not accepted. That's the first distinction between the interpretation of sentences involving numeral reduplication and the sentences involving the quantifier kila. The second diagnostic applies to our data concern atomicity or atomic distribution. In atomic distribution, the number of objects must be evenly distributed across the subject. In our case, 2 rabbits are required for 1 person. Only 2 rabbits are required for 1 person, as illustrated by the pictures on this slide. Unlike atomic distribution, where the distributed number of objects must always be the same, in non-atomic distribution, the number may sometimes differ. As shown in this scenario, we often have 2 rabbits for each man, but in the last circle case, we have 2 rabbits for 2 men, but not for just 1 man. This is what we call a non-atomic distributivity or non-atomic distribution. So the result of the second diagnostic are presented in this slide. For the sentence involving a reduplicated numeral repeated here in 13, a scenario of non-atomic distribution is accepted. However, for the sentence with a distributive quantifier repeated in 14, a scenario of non-atomic distribution is rejected. So these first 2 diagnostics show that the distribution involved by reduplicated numerals is really different from that of the quantifier kila, which mean every or each. This supports the idea that numeral reduplication primarily serves as pluractional markers, while distributivity is secondary and it is neither exhaustive nor atomic. Let's now move to another point that distinguish these two items. The third element showing that reduplicated numerals function more as a marker of pluractionality than distributivity is the interpretation imposed by a singular argument that is here a singular object, a singular subject. In the first example, with a plural subject, we mentioned that sentences with a reduplicated numeral have three different distributive readings: temporal distribution, spatial distribution, and participant distribution. However, in sentence 15, with a singular subject who is Luku, the sentence Luku carried three boxes have only the temporal distribution reading. In other words, the subject performed the action multiple times, which falls under the notion of pluractionality, and in each event, he carried three boxes. The fourth element showing that reduplicated numerals function more as markers of pluractionality than of distributivity is the plurality requirement. Plurality requirement relate to the question of whether the participants introduced by a duplicated numeral must be different or the same in each event. In other words, if the same elements are always involved, then there is only one action or one event described by the verb. However, if the subject or object change in each event, this requires multiple actions which refer to pluractionality. The test to determine this involve the insertion of a determiner before the object modified by the numeral. Thus, this turns out to be ungrammatical, as shown in example 16b, where a determiner is present. This is not possible because the sentence implies that there are two different rabbits in each event, which contradict the presence of a determiner referring to the same two events described by the verb. The fifth element showing that reduplicated numerals function as a marker of pluractionality lie in sentences with verbs that denote antidurative events. Antidurative simply means avoiding the accumulation of sub-event that could otherwise be combined into an uninterrupted durative event. In other words, interruption is mandatory between sub-events, which implies a plurality of actions or a plurality of events. This corresponds to what it is called pluractionality. We choose the verb to sleep, which denote antidurative event. For the sentence in 17, with the verb sleep, the girl slept for 4 hours. A scenario where a girl slept for 4 hours and without the alarm clock ringing, continue to sleep for another 4 hours, resulting in a total of 8 uninterrupted hours, is rejected. It is not accepted by our informant or it is not accepted by native speakers. This means only a scenario involving multiple distinct sleeping events is accepted, which correspond to the notion of pluractionality. So these 5 diagnostics apply to our data have shown that numeral reduplication functions as a marker of pluractionality, and that distributivity is secondary in the sense that it results from the separation of sub-event. So to conclude our presentation, I will summarize the main points of our study. In our presentation, we showed that numeral reduplication in Maasai systematically involves durative distributive readings at first glance. However, when examined in details, we have argued that numeral reduplication is not actually a marker of distributivity, but rather a marker of pluractionality or event plurality. And distributivity is a consequence of separation of individual across event.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We can now begin the question and answer section. The question and answer section will be open to voice questions as well as written questions. If you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand in the nonverbal controls present underneath the participant panel, and I will send you a request to unmute. If you prefer to ask a written question, that is also still possible. You can do so using the Zoom chat module, and I will read out the question. Please remember that the webinars are recorded so that if you ask a question, this will be part of the recording and will be released on the YouTube channel. Bonnie, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you for bringing a nice set of data and, to our attention. And I really enjoyed the art that was had Africans in it, and that the bunnies were not killed. They looked very cute. No one rejected the sentence because the bunnies hadn't been shot. How did you get the artwork? Did you have somebody create that for you?
Amazigh, can you talk about how you created the images using? Yeah,
I have created the pictures using artificial intelligent language model.
I also like the example with the sleeping. That wasn't something I would have thought to test that verb, but that definitely shows that it must be pluractional and to sleep more than, to sleep for 4.
Do you speak about this example?
Yeah, I just thought it was a clever test to use that verb.
In this example, our informant don't accept to describe the event as one event of sleeping 8 hours. So the event require multiple or multiple how I can say it, multiple event of sleeping. So the girl sleep 4 hours, and then after sometimes she sleep again 4 hours, but not at one time 8 hours. 8 hours. I don't know if is it clear for you? Or...
Yes, it's clear. Thanks.
I was curious about kila. I assume that's borrowed from Swahili, and I was just wondering if it's used sort of in exactly the same ways in Maasai, or if it's changed in either its meaning or its morphosyntactic usage in the process of being borrowed.
Yes, kila is borrowed from Swahili, and it's interesting because it works the same way. It's used in Swahili. So we have 2 choices. When you want to describe distributivity, for example, or pluractionality, you either use kila or nabo nabo, which you would translate literally saying one, to mean each or every, depending on the context and the semantics of the sentence. So yes, it is the same kila that is borrowed from Swahili. Let's see, Martin Mouse asked the same question on the chat room.
So, Michael, does that mean that we can have a form like nabo nabo, and then we can have like are as well used in the same sentence?
You mean the same like 14 or the same whatever sentence?
Yeah, could you have this Maasai form of kila together with a pluractional, or with a reduplicated numeral? So you have the one reduplicated numeral meaning kila, each or every, and then you could have another reduplicated numeral meaning a pluractional reading? Or is that just, am I just making a mistake here? Would the semantics be messed up?
Yeah, and I was saying that nabo nabo works in a similar way. We use each and every. But when you have are or to mean two, it doesn't mean each and every. In that case, it would mean a reduplicated numeral which would have an interpretation that maybe there are several events in the statement. These are interpretations of several events, or in other cases, in secondary function, maybe for distributivity, individual participants in the event. So Nabo primarily gives the each and every meaning in Maasai.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, I would like to read out a few things from the chat. So Simon asked, can sleeping be understood as how often one goes to bed?
So thinking about this sentence, Ragendito San one, not really about how often, because this is about duration that the person slept. So he slept for 4 hours, but it doesn't give at any point, doesn't give the meaning that it says how often this person goes to bed.
Okay, and then Marta added a comment that when we tried a pluractional with to sleep, it also implies different places.
Different places.
And I would expect that Martin is referring to Iraq here.
Maybe, yeah, it could. Precisely, yeah.
He says no, conso he's referring to. A pluractional verb can be used with a singular object and subject if the action is multiple. In that sense, this is different from pluractional. Moreover, pluractional tends to refer to objects for transitive verbs, while the reduplicated numeral tends to involve plurality in the subject.
Yeah, I think partly it's true. Yeah, it's true.
Marta, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting talk, but I think if you would have done the opposite, and if you would have tested, is this phenomenon pluractional, and go with all the properties of pluractionality in the events, you would have concluded, no, it's not. So let's call it distributive. So I don't know. That is a little bit, to me, problematic about the analysis. My first question was about not about Kila in Swahili, but this whole phenomenon of two rabbits. I mean, you can also say that you can do that in Swahili. You can do that, I think, probably in any language in Tanzania. So my question to Michael is, does he have the feeling that Maasai differs from Swahili in the interpretation of these sentences?
So if we take one sentence, for example, each man has hunted 2 rabbits. You'll have kila mwanaume amewinda sungura wawili.
But the first one, the man hunted 2 rabbits.
The man hunted two rabbits. Yeah, so if you refer to the scenario where we have the pictures.
My impression is that, but that's just a feeling. If you have situations of perfect bilingualism, which is valid for a lot of people in East Africa, I would think it's very difficult to have different interpretations for these constructions in the 2 languages that you master.
Probably, but I mean, we cannot say for sure because maybe you would want to run all the diagnostics that we run here. So yeah, I mean, we would have something to say if we kind of tested the Swahili sentences, if they all give the same interpretation that we find in Maasai. But for now, I think I'm afraid we cannot say.
Of course. But you could add an extra dimension to it if you would do the same pictures, the sentences in Swahili to the same people.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's something we can look into.
If that is technically possible for you, I would be very excited about the result.
Thank you for the idea.
Simon suggests in the chat that he thinks that in Swahili it could mean both distributive and plural marking, pluractional marking.
Yeah.
Swahili is such a large language, and yet we don't have answers to things like. how does
But
this
it kind of responds to Martin's comment. I mean, if we have these perfect these overlaps of people speaking Swahili, but then an overlap of somebody perfectly bilingual in another language, what's to say that the interpretation will be the Swahili interpretation? Maybe it will be the interpretation that would be for the other language. So you can see
Yeah.
this going back and forth in interesting ways.
Yeah, and maybe not only in Swahili, but also in English, for example, if you have same interpretation for killer to mean each and every, for every instance that would be used or interpreted in English, it would be interesting also to see, I mean, why, why, or interesting to see that they share the semantic nuances across languages.
But these expressions with the reduplicated numeral are very common all over Africa and not so common in Europe.
Thank you. I think those are all of the questions and comments for today. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that recordings of all of the presentations in the Rift Valley webinar series can be found on the Rift Valley Network YouTube page, and entries for each presentation are added to the Rift Valley bibliography. I would like to thank Amazigh and Michael again for their presentation and everyone else for participating today. I hope to see you again at our next webinar entitled Speech to which no one says is an orphan, Backchanneling in Kambata Conversations by Yvonne Trice, Joseph Jonas Zacharias, and Teshome Dagne Madebo on Wednesday, the 19th of February.